This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Now Norwood tries to kick his longest ever on grass, 47 yards.
So those two words, that is the whole focus of this episode, wide right. Welcome into the Distant Replay podcast. I am Ben George, alongside Mike Noto. Mike, Super Bowl 25, my friend. This one's got you fired up, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, this is right in my wheelhouse. Right when I started really getting into sports, some of my favorite announcers on the call. Lived in New Jersey when this game was going down, so it was a big game locally. So huge game.
So if you're just joining us for the first time, we go back and we look at, relive and rewatch one game. We pick out a game that was a classic for whatever reason, and we watch it from start to finish again as it originally aired, and then we talk about it. We'll give some pregame thoughts, set up the game for you. We'll go into the actual game, kind of talk about big plays, big moments that we witnessed and saw, and then we'll wrap it up by kind of taking a look at how things transpired since for each team, for the coaches, for the players, some what-if scenarios, social media, how it would have looked back then, a lot of different things to come today. So let's jump right into this one. Setting the stage, as I mentioned, Super Bowl 25, Buffalo Bills, New York Giants. This game took place at Tampa Stadium on January 27th, 1991. And I mean, really, Mike, there's not really anything we need to set up in terms of why we picked this one, right? I mean, it was one of the greatest Super Bowls, and the wide right moment pretty much speaks for itself.
Absolutely. There's certain games throughout not only NFL history, but sports history that you really remember for one play, especially a game like this that was played very well throughout by both teams. There was no other glaring mistakes, no other really glaring great plays in the game either. So especially in a game like this, that wide right really sticks out.
Yeah, and I'm going to set this game up in just a second. What did you remember, though, about this matchup? Because you're more of an NFL guy, so I figure you probably have a better memory of this game when it happened than I did.
What I remembered about this game was, number one, the contrast in styles. It played out in this game perfectly, the contrast in styles, but the Giants being more of a defensive, running the football kind of team, playing with a backup quarterback, and the Bills playing an offense in the K-gun, no-huddle, which we've seen very rarely even since then, a team run all no-huddle all the time, calling plays at the line. So if there was something that really I remembered about this game before I even watched it, was the contrast in styles between the two teams. And also something maybe not related to the actual game, but the Whitney Houston Star Spangled Banner singing at the beginning. Obviously remember that, given what was going on in the country at that time with the war in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, the Gulf War was lingering, and that's why they were also wearing the American flag helmet stickers during this game as well. But for me, I only really remember the matchup. I don't remember a lot surrounding it. I guess I kind of remember Whitney Houston being at this Super Bowl. I remember her performance. I think I remember her being part of this. But to me, I just remember the two teams and that kick, right? And this kind of being the start of the Bills floundering on the big stage. This was kind of the beginning of that. That's what I remember. So not a whole lot else going into this game. I learned a lot in this matchup. So let's set the stage for why this game is important. Obviously, Super Bowl. That's pretty clear. But going into this, the NFC had won 6 straight Super Bowls. Now we know, looking back in history, they'd go on to win 13 straight before the AFC would pick up another one. Some other notes, playoffs had just expanded from 10 games to 12 games. Did you realize that, Mike, that this was the year that they expanded by adding an extra wild card?
Before researching this game, I did not. And something other of note is I don't think the NFL really had a firm grasp on the schedule yet, or how to work things with the expanded playoff format, because these teams actually didn't have a week off in between the conference championship game and the Super Bowl. So you had the Giants going from New York to San Francisco, winning the NFC championship game rather, on that Matt Barr last second field goal. And then you have them flying from San Francisco to Tampa for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, quite a schedule there. And that was Paul Tagliabue's first year as commissioner. He'd just taken over from Rozelle. So he made some changes over the course of his tenure for sure. But the reason, and you touched on this briefly, the reason the Super Bowl was such a big deal, not only was it the first time ever two teams from the same state were playing each other in Super Bowl. But both these teams were really, really good. 13-3 regular season records. Only the 49ers were better at 14-2. This year was also the first time two teams started 10-0 ever in the NFL. That was the Giants and the 49ers. And then these two teams basically ran through the playoffs, except that 15-13 win over the 49ers you mentioned, but that was against the best team. Buffalo, 44 points against Miami, then won 51-3 against the Rams.
Yeah, and what really caught my attention this was the Bills relatively had a pretty easy road through the regular season and through the playoffs. They dominated the Raiders in the AFC Championship game. And you had the Giants, who they ended up with a good record, but they sort of had to change who they were throughout the season here. Once Phil Simms goes down later in the season, they turn to Jeff Hostetler. And also Ottis Anderson, who we'll get to later, played a huge role in this game. He wasn't even a full-time starter, the main back until later in the season. I'm sure you remember Rodney Hampton.
Yeah,
he was a rookie. He was a rookie this season and really assumed a lot of the lead back roles early and mid-season before he got hurt later in the season as well. So the Giants sort of had to change who they were. They were very kind of like the Parcells and Belichick teams you think of now. They sort of molded themselves in whatever they had to do that week to win. And I think this is the start of that whole lore with those two guys and their coaching prowess.
Yeah, well, the one thing that the Giants really didn't have to change was their defense. This was the number one scoring offense versus the number one scoring defense. That's why there was so much hype around this game going into it. It was a clash of styles, and still to this day we talk about who wins out, offense or defense, right? And this was a case in which the defense will win out. So where were you when this game happened?
So you have to remember now. So I grew up in central New Jersey, and the Giants were the biggest thing in that area of New Jersey in the mid 80s, late 80s, and into the early 90s when this game took place. So I was watching the game with my family, and you could literally hear audible yells from the houses that surrounded me during this game. That's how much people were into it. Myself, I'm not a Giants fan, but you couldn't help but get caught up in, their defense. Coming off that Super Bowl in '86, it was an absolute frenzy. That was the first Super Bowl victory in Giants history. Now you had them come into this 1990 game where, I don't think the confidence was as high, but they were certainly confident in their defense. And I just remember the overall scene playing out in my neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, opposite for me. I was in Birmingham, young kid in Birmingham. People probably had it on, but it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a huge happening. I mean, more people were talking about the recent Alabama-Auburn seasons than they were talking about the Super Bowl. So I remember the game, remember the bigger moments such as the National Anthem, but beyond that, this game was pretty fresh for the most part for me. All right, so another thing about this game before we get started is the coaches. Coaches first. So we know Marv Levy, we know Bill Parcells, but that Giants coaching staff, last episode we talked about the Patriots coaching staff who won the Super Bowl in 2001. This coaching staff, though, was an all-time great staff.
What a staff. I mean, you had Belichick as the defensive coordinator. You had Ron Earhart, who I know Giants fans know, and I believe he ended up in Pittsburgh a little bit later in his career as well, who was a very good offensive coordinator. You had Tom Coughlin, who would later coach the Giants to 2 Super Bowl wins. He was the receivers coach on this team.
Yeah.
As assistants, you had Romeo Crennel, Charlie Weiss, Al Groh, who would go on to become a professional coach for the Jets. And you also had Ray Hanley, who would end up being the successor out of all these guys that I just mentioned. You probably knew every guy I just mentioned, except for Ray Hanley, who ended up being the successor to Parcells once he left the Giants.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's something. This staff from top to bottom had head coaches in really every position. It's pretty incredible the staff they had put together there, and it makes more sense of why this team was so good. We talk about players a lot, but coaches have a lot to do with that game plan.
Yeah, do you know why I remember Ray Hanley? Want to hear a story?
No clue.
Young Mike went to Giants training camp, which was mistake number one. Why I wasn't at Jets training camp, I don't know. But Ray Hanley's first year, it was supposed to be an open practice, and Ray Hanley closed practice. So we drove all the way to the Giants training camp for no reason because Ray Hanley, awful coach Ray Hanley, decided to close practice. So I'll never forget Ray Hanley.
Yeah, you've been better about the Giants. It dates back pretty deep. I see the scars, the wounds are there. Ray Hanley.
Ray Hanley, man. It all started with Ray Hanley.
You could go multiple choice, like which of these coaches lead the Giants? And you could have put Ray Hanley on that list, and I would have gone another direction. There's no question. Ray Handley, I don't know how that guy was the head coach, but I learned something new. Players in this game, I think, were very interesting because there were so many superstars. First with the Bills, you have Bruce Smith, Cornelius Bennett, Mark Kelso. That Bills team had 5 Hall of Famers. 4 of those were on offense, and that was the big story for the Bills.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this offense, they beat the Jets' brains in twice a year for this time period. So I remember this offense well. I mean, they just came at you in waves. It just never stopped. I mean, it's still to this day, outside of Peyton Manning's Colts teams, is there another team that called plays at the line of scrimmage, no huddle like the Bills have? Not for just a drive. This is how they ran their offense. The K-gun offense. For those of you who are younger football fans who have no clue what I'm talking about, watch this game and then look up the K-gun offense. It was absolutely, even like Warren Moon in the run and shoot. I don't think it was complete no huddle, call the plays at the line, was it?
I don't think so. I mean, I didn't remember this being a no huddle team. I didn't really remember that being a system that early outside of like a 2-minute offense. But yeah, I mean, these guys were snap the ball, run the play, right back to the line. Let's do it all over again. It was fun to watch. And honestly, wish we could have seen more of that over the course of this game, but the defense, as we'll talk about, stepped up. And the defense for the Giants was really the headliners on this side. I mean, the defense was loaded.
This is the first 3-4 team I could ever remember watching and really knowing the players. And what sticks out to me from this Giants team is that linebacking core. So you had Lawrence Taylor and Carl Banks on the outside. You had Pepper Johnson on the inside. You had who everyone remembers, he was a good player, but everyone remembers him because of his name. There's not many guys, named Pepper. And you had Gary Reasons also on the inside. And not to mention, the Leonard Marshalls of the world on the defensive line. This team was just this defense for this time period when they had Parcells and Belichick in the mid 80s to late 80s, early 90s. They were it. And obviously led by Lawrence Taylor, who had a quiet game in this game, but he was, maybe arguably the best defensive player ever.
Yeah, no question. It was loaded. And that's why it ended up being such a great matchup in this game. Let's dive into the game. Start off with some things before we get into the gameplay. Broadcast first. ABC, this is a great crew. I mean, this is a crew that was a Monday Night Football crew, really a class broadcast crew as you would expect for a Super Bowl.
These guys are the 3 guys when a young Mike first got a TV in his room and your parents tell you to go to bed and you watch TV on very low volume or no volume. These are the 3 guys that I started watching at that point on Monday Night Football. So to me, these 3 guys, Al Michaels, Frank Gifford, and Dan Deerdorf, they're legends to me. These are the guys I grew up watching. These 3, along with Summerall and Madden on CBS on Sundays, these were the guys for me.
Yeah, and Lynn Swann and Jack Arute on the sideline. So, I mean, there was star power on this broadcast, even though I don't really remember Lynn Swann or Jack Arute at all in this broadcast. Do you?
I didn't. I think there was a lot less focus in those days on the sideline reporters. I just think overall it wasn't as big of a role as it is today.
Yeah, that was a broadcast, and as you can imagine, really a very simple broadcast. The production value really down from what you would see now, as you would expect. I mean, almost 30 years ago now. Really, I mean, just really getting into the game was different. I mean, there wasn't a huge hoopla, big intro, like we'd see now, a really 4 or 5 minute intro into a Super Bowl. This was just really right into it. The game got right into it, and it seemed a lot different in that aspect because it felt to me like you weren't watching a Super Bowl. It kind of felt like you were watching a playoff game in which you were watching it at somebody's home field, right? Because the fans were into it. It didn't feel it felt like a football game rather than like a corporate, everybody gets tickets because it's the place to be type thing. These were football fans in there for a game between 2 teams they loved.
And you know why I think that sticks out so much when you're watching a game like this is because you weren't bothered by all the other bells and whistles on the screen while you were watching. So you were paying attention more to the announcers. You were paying attention more to the crowd reaction. You were paying attention more, quite frankly, to the play-by-play of the game. And it just makes you think, I know all those things are necessary these days with the attention spans everyone has, but I even found myself during sometimes in this game wondering, not forgetting how much time was even left. And I thought it was me. I'm like, am I missing the time? Is it the feed of the game I'm watching? But I watched a couple feeds, and they showed the time clock. It seemed like once every 4 or 5 minutes of game time.
Maybe not even that. I mean, it might even have been like twice a quarter, because I felt the same way. I mean, I don't know how I would never go back to wanting to watch a game without score and time on it constantly, because it's impossible to kind of figure out where you were. There was I think maybe it was the third quarter or the second. At one point I thought there's probably like a minute or two left in this quarter, and there was like 6 or 7 minutes left. I had no sense of where we were in the game. I felt the rhythm of the game, but I had no idea the urgency each team was playing with based on where the clock was. So that was pretty interesting as well. All right, so let's dive into this game a little bit in terms of moments. I'm going to let you kind of take the lead a little bit on this, but I want to share a couple things that I picked up on early on, a couple of interesting moments. First off, Al Michaels referenced during the game that the Bills were a 7-point favorite. And I guess it caught me a little bit more because right now we're in such a world where sports betting is legalized in a lot of states and it's becoming much more mainstream. But I don't remember a lot of instances before where point spreads were talked about at all. So I was surprised to hear that.
Yeah, and you got to respect Al Michaels, because him along with Brent Musburger, when he used to do games, they always sort of weave in the point spread or some crack about, betting into the game. And they do it in a way where you have to be listening to sort of catch on to it. But, that it did surprise me that he did mention that. You're used to it more now. Before, probably 2 or 3 years ago, was mentioned a lot less. But given the rise of sports betting lately, you hear it more. But, overall, I thought I was actually surprised to hear the spread was 7 when I, listening to it. I wouldn't. But then when you go back and look at it, the Bills are coming in after crushing teams in the AFC. The Giants, although they won in their style, ground and pound and defense, their offense was not prolific on the NFC side of things. So I guess I could see the spread in the way it was.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And 2 other quick observations on how things have aged through the years. We kind of share this at different points in the show. We'll maybe start sharing it earlier before we get into the game. But a couple of things that I noticed that seemed out of place now. First, a Marlboro Red ad, the cigarette ad that was on the side. You never see it before, but that was like a trademark ad that you would see all over the place before, when cigarettes were such a huge, huge spender and media buyer. I mean, now you'd probably just see an ad for a vaping pen or something.
Back in the day, if cigarette companies wanted to advertise in NFL games, the NFL did not care about the overall health of their viewers, that's for sure.
No.
If you think the NFL is about the bottom dollar now from an advertising standpoint, there was no cancel culture back in 1991. I can tell you that much.
The other thing I noticed, too, was I thought it was hilarious. During the fourth quarter, of the Super Bowl, a game that's a one-score game, during a timeout, I think they were, they had like a wide shot of the field, and they were talking about probably matchup or what's coming up or strategy, whatever. The Ghostbusters theme song was playing in the stadium. Did you notice that? I mean, obviously Ghostbusters was a hit movie at this time. I don't even remember the exact date, but it was right around this time, early 80s, mid 80s. But that song was being played in the game, and I kind of just laughed. Like it wasn't exciting, didn't fire me up. I can't imagine they would have at that time, but I guess with it being such a big movie, a blockbuster, it was all the rage.
And there was a couple times in this game when they were coming out of a timeout, and you know how the music's playing in the stadium. It was some kind of like wacky late 80s, early 90s song I haven't heard in 25
like
years. There was like 2 or 3 instances of that. It was great. I mean, it was great hearing those songs. It brought me back. And also, I love how the PA announcers sound like your local high school PA announcers. They these days, the sound systems are so much better these days in terms of quality.
Yeah.
And back then, it literally sounded like a Friday night in Birmingham.
Yeah, for sure. Let's dive into the game. Start first half. What are some of your thoughts? Some of the key moments that you picked up on?
So this isn't really a key moment, but I'm not sure if you noticed the first play of the game, the Giants kickoff. Matt Barr, the kicker for the Giants, who was the hero the week before, as I mentioned, hit the game-winning field goal against the 49ers. Not only makes the tackle on the first kickoff, but he makes the tackle on the 30-yard line. He came all the way up to the 30-yard line and made a tackle. When's the last time you've seen that? But other than that, overall in the first half, what you notice is the Bills had a lot of the momentum. Now, it didn't really translate into them getting out to a really big lead, but the Bills had a lot of the momentum here early on in this game. And, they translated that into a big play to James Lofton in the first quarter and a field goal. Also, did it seem to you that Hostetler in the first half especially looked like he almost got hurt there a couple times?
Yeah, Hostetler got beat up on quite a bit this game, and setting the kind of the stage, and we didn't really hit on this too much, but Hostetler, to me, I was really kind of surprised that he was a quarterback here. I remember him in the league, but I do not remember him being a Super Bowl winning quarterback with the Giants, because all I think of is Phil Simms. I mean, he's the guy that's synonymous with those Giants teams. So when he took the field, I was like, I had to do a double take. I was not prepared for Jeff Hostetler's name to be in this broadcast, but especially not for him to be the starter. So that was a huge surprise to me. But yeah, he took some big shots in this game in the second quarter. Leonard Marshall crushed him on a late hit on one of them. So, and the funny other part of this was, I think at one point, I think it was Michaels maybe or Gifford, I don't remember who it was, but they referred to Hostetler as the mobile one, as the mobile quarterback. And if you watch him play, the fact that he was considered mobile for that time in that period is astounding, because he would not even be close to that this day and age.
There's always things in these games that amaze you, the difference between, then and now. When they make a special case to point out that someone threw for over 3,000 yards in a season back then, like it was a big deal. Now, average quarterbacks throw for 4,000.
Right.
Little things like just the overall, the size of the pads these guys had on. I mean, did you see the size of O.J. Anderson's pads? Yeah. It was ridiculous.
It was a different game. I mean, the jerseys weren't skin tight. The helmets were different, a little bit bigger, probably not as well protected. The single bar kicker helmets were in style. That was the biggest thing to me, was what you said. It kind of a Bills first half, kind of felt like they controlled a lot of it, but never were able to really put away the Giants or really stretch out that lead and put a lot of pressure on New York in this game. And it opened the door for that last drive of the first half, where the Giants go 87 yards, 10 plays, I think, and then a great touchdown throw by Hostetler, a really, really good touchdown throw and catch with just 25 seconds on the clock. And at that time, it made it 12-10, pretty much going into halftime. Bills didn't do anything with the ball, and they got it back. And any momentum that the Bills had was pretty much zapped out of that sideline, and that energy was taken away. And that was a huge point of emphasis going into halftime.
Yeah, when you talk to an old school Giants fan, a guy who was around forever and loves the team, they'll point in this game, the first thing they'll mention to you about the early part of the game was the stretch in the second quarter when they were down 12-3, like you just said, 10 plays, 87 yards. Hostetler, like we mentioned to that point, getting hit a lot, but he throws an absolute gem of a pass to Stephen Baker for the touchdown to make it 12-10 Bills at halftime. You have that drive, 10 plays, 87 yards, combined with the drive right out of halftime that went 9 minutes, 14 plays. And I think looking back on the overall themes of this game might have been one of those memorable drives in Super Bowl history in terms of the length of it, the number of plays, and the overall impact it had on the final score. I mean, you had the Giants in this game who had 40 minutes in time of possession. 40 minutes in time of possession against a team that was one of the most prolific offenses, certainly of that time period, and maybe in NFL history.
Yeah, if you haven't watched this game, it's worth going back and watching this game for that one drive alone to start the second half. I mean, it really was that impressive. And it's a drive you don't see in the NFL really at all. You'd never seen up to that point. It was the longest drive time-wise in Super Bowl history to that point. I assume it probably still is. Can't really imagine there's been any more 10-minute drives or nearly 10-minute drives to this point, 14 plays. This is something like you see in college with teams really in this period and even up to 15 years ago. Run. But the one big play on that drive, Mark Ingram, a 3rd and 13 catch that he made, and he broke 5 tackles, got the final 5 yards basically going around and through guys. They got the first down and kept that drive alive, because if he doesn't get that first down, they're probably kicking a field goal. And I don't remember exactly where they were on the field, probably the 25-ish. It was no gimme field goal. So that could have changed the whole complexion of the game if he doesn't get a first down there.
That was a great run after catch. That's an excellent point to bring up, Ben. And for those of you who don't know, Mark Ingram is the father of Mark Ingram, who started Alabama, as you're very familiar with, Ben, and is now a running back for the Baltimore Ravens. So those of you who are younger who might have heard the name Mark Ingram and said, wow, he was playing in 1991 as a receiver. No, it's his father. And
he was good too.
Look, He was for sure. And one thing in that drive, I don't know if you noticed, I tried to find this clip, but I couldn't find it anywhere, just the clip of the play. The basically uppercut stiff arm that O.J. Anderson gave to a defensive back. How vicious was that?
Would that be legal today? I have no idea. I've never seen it happen before.
Honestly, it's one of those things where it's the NFL. You've never seen it happen, so the refs would probably just make it up as they go. I don't see how in this day and age that could be legal, though.
What Mike's describing is he breaks one loose down the left side. He's got the safety coming over to make the tackle. And, where most guys would kind of gear up and like lower their shoulder, lower their head, get ready for impact, he reared back like he was going to uppercut punch this safety, and he basically does. Full swing, arm goes into it, throws his whole body into this thing, and basically hits the guy underneath, really like his chin strap for the most part, to kind of knock him away. I did. I rewound it as well when I saw that, because I said, what did I just see? I've literally never seen that move before by any other player in football.
Yeah, and that brings up a kind of to highlight. We just highlighted O.J. Anderson. And the running backs overall in this game were great up until this point and throughout the whole game.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Ottis Anderson and Dave Meggett for the Giants, who played great in this game, and Thurman Thomas, who played better than both of them. Thurman Thomas now you found out later that was sort of Belichick's defensive game plan, was to allow Thurman Thomas to go crazy and then to not let the receivers get deep.
Yeah.
But, when you're watching this game, you don't really remember that because he was great. And even at one point during the second quarter, you had Deerdorf compare him to O.J. Simpson, which in 1991 was still acceptable. Probably the best way to put
it. And really, like, that was a brilliant game plan by Belichick, right? But honestly, it wouldn't have worked had the offense not have been so efficient, I don't think, for the Giants too. It wasn't his game plan that kept the ball for 40 minutes. You know what I mean? But it did limit what the Bills were able to do offensively. But after these two drives, in this first half, beginning of second half, at that point, and they mentioned this on the broadcast, the Bills offense and the New York Giants defense had not been on the field in an hour of real time. I mean, astounding between halftime and those two drives. They'd not been on the field forever. And it's hard. I mean, you can make whatever excuses you want to, but for anybody, especially an offense is based on rhythm and timing and movement and tempo, this really changed everything for them. They didn't have a bad second half, but there really was no rhythm out of this team from that point forward, even moving in the fourth quarter. I mean, I think that those two drives were the game to me.
They absolutely were because, like you said, they set the tone. And, when you go back and watch this, you sort of maybe think that maybe Belichick, I know, is a great defensive game plan, and he's turned into the greatest coach in NFL history and all the qualifiers I can put in here. But maybe his defense gets a little too much credit for this game. Like you said, that offensive game plan they put together and to hold the ball for 40 minutes, it's never talked about. It's talked about, but not as much as the kick and not as much as the Giants defense in this game. And these two drives, I mean, we've been talking about it here for a while just to show you how important these two drives were in the landscape of the game. And the Giants would then go after three quarters, they'd be up 17-12, and then we head into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and that fourth quarter, too, it started off, Thurman Thomas busted a long run, and as you mentioned, really, really strong running back. Fun to watch that kid, man. I remember he really stood out to me as a kid growing up. That was one of the guys that you would watch and pay attention to, and you knew his name no matter where you lived. And it's because of games like this and performance like this. Fast, shifty, powerful. He had every quality you want from a running back, and he showed that in the early fourth quarter when he busted a 30-plus yard run for a touchdown. And then at that point, you're thinking, I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective. Like, Giants fans have to be thinking, man, we just dominated the entire last hour and a half, and we're down 2 points now in the fourth quarter to this team.
From a Giants standpoint, how could you play a cleaner game than they played to this point?
Yeah.
I mean, they've held the best offensive in football, who scored 50-plus points in the AFC Championship game, to 19 points here at the beginning of the fourth quarter. They've held the ball for double in terms of time of possession. And like you said, they're still losing.
Mm-hmm. And that takes us to a couple of drives late in this quarter. The first one I want to start with is the Giants drove again, and they were driving down the field, looking to put more points up on the board, down 19-17, right? Looking to take the lead. But I admire the way the Bills defense played, and they had some really good players, but this defense rose to the occasion when they had to on this drive and stop the Giants, who had a 1st and goal inside the 10, may have gotten down to the 5 on this drive. And even as much as they had been on the field all game, rose up to the occasion, held them to a field goal, and kept that game 19-17 and gave their offense the chance to win it.
We mentioned some of the really good players from this game before. You know, we mentioned Bruce Smith on the Bills defense. We mentioned Cornelius Bennett on the Bills defense. But what about number 91, Wright, the nose tackle? I mean, there's a guy, to be honest, I'd never even heard of before. He made a lot of good plays in that drive in particular. And I thought overall, like you said, the Bills defense, like we just said, that they were losing the time of possession battle by double. And this Bills defense absolutely just gave everything they had in this game. And again, they showed a lot in that drive.
And that takes us to the last drive. So what was there, a minute plus left on the clock when that final drive started?
About that, yep.
Yeah, and Kelly takes the field, and you kind of had that sense. I think the crowd, you got to feel the energy in the stadium there that, okay, this is the spot. And if you want one quarterback, one offense in 1990, this would have been it. And they took the field and moved it down a decent amount. It came up to that final field goal. And the first thing that I thought of on that field goal was all the talk that we have now. And when we relive this game in the present, to me, we always talk about that field goal and with the sense of the fact that it was an easy field goal. That's what I kind of remembered, it being like a chip shot field goal. I didn't realize it was a 47-yard field goal. I mean, anything but guaranteed for that field goal. But everybody that talks about it, wide right, blew the game for the Bills. You would have thought that the kicker was like the lamest part of this game. And honestly, he missed a kick, but this kick was, in the bigger grand picture of this game, it was just one play, and it completely, in my mind, did not result in the Bills losing this game, although it was the kick at the moment.
You would think that Norwood had a history of nailing kicks like this.
Yeah,
I mean, you go back, the first graphic they showed before the drive started, you know, thinking that it could come down to a Norwood field goal here, was that he was 1 for his last 5 on 40-plus yard field goals on grass.
Yep.
And another graphic later in the drive showed that he never hit a 50-plus yard field goal in his career.
Crazy.
So it's absolutely wild that he's as much of a GOAT as he is when, you know, why with 25 seconds left, given Norwood's history, something that the Bills coaches should know more than anyone, obviously, why are they running the ball with 25 seconds left and running it from 25 seconds all the way down to under 10 seconds to set him up for that field goal?
Yeah.
Why weren't they trying to move the ball down the field more and at least try to get in that 40-yard range to give him a better chance? I was struck by that too. I can't agree with you more. You know, they went through in the beginning of the game how the guy had so many problems on kickoffs, kicking him in the end zone. You just had all this evidence of the fact that he didn't have that strong of a leg.
No.
And he never, and in his career, he never did. So the expectations, I think, were probably too much given his history.
Yeah, I thought there was going to be another play or two before that field goal was kicked because I was thinking this field goal has to be about 35 yards. I mean, why are we making such a big deal and hanging this entire legacy of this game on this one kick when this is a 47-yard field goal by a guy that had not performed in this situation at all over his career? I mean, the signs were there. So I was shocked by that, but the field goal missed wide right, as you heard at the beginning of the show, and that was it. The Bills lost the first of 4 straight Super Bowls, and on the other side, it was Bill Parcells getting carried off the field as the Giant Super Bowl winning head coach. So quite the finish for this game, and I would imagine your street at that point was going wild.
Oh, man, I'm talking people out in the street with pans and pots, banging them together, you know, those noisemakers, going crazy in the streets, people obviously imbibing a little bit as well. So you just had people, it was January, it was freezing, but it was chaos in a good way.
So that was the game. Winners, the Giants, Super Bowl 25 champions. So let's move into the post game on this, and I think this is where we'll have some fun conversation. We'll start off on how this impacted each team, right? So the Bills, as I mentioned, one of the great offenses of all time, superstars up and down that roster, especially on offense. They lost 4 straight Super Bowls, and it's still hard to believe even to this day that they played in a Super Bowl 4 times, but all but this one got destroyed pretty much in the Super Bowl 4 straight years.
Yeah, they got trounced 4 straight years. They would lose to the Redskins the next season, and then obviously lose 2 straight to the Cowboys, the Jimmy Johnson Cowboy teams. And I think that's what made this kick by Norwood sort of get worse with time. If that makes
probably.
Because when Bills fans look back on it, they're like, wow, that was our best team, and that was the one we actually had a chance to win.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. That kick has definitely aged poorly because of what happened since, but still amazing. Would you rather, as a fan, have your team play in 4 Super Bowls and never win, or just not even be relevant?
Look, you're talking to someone whose teams, for the large majority of my life, haven't really been competitive. So if you're asking me, I'd want to make it to the Super Bowl 4 straight years.
You'd rather lose 4 straight like this than what you had.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I'd much rather that. I mean, it's the feeling you have when your team is, 2-7 in November in football. It's especially for like 30 straight years, like I have with the Jets a lot of times. It bogs you down a little bit.
The Giants on the other side of this. So kind of interesting on the Giants. This was, Parcells had this incredible run, but after this, it wasn't all roses for the Giants too. I mean, it's been up and down for the most part.
Look, after this is when the Giants, this little run the Giants had with Parcells and Belichick and Sims and Lawrence Taylor. I think those 4 are really when you think about this era in Giants football, those 4, along with the general manager, George Young, are probably the 4 or 5 guys you think of most. And this is the last time they would make a Super Bowl. Within a couple years, Sims was retired. Lawrence Taylor was retired. Parcells would leave and go to the Patriots. Eventually, it was the next stop in his career, and Ray Hanley would replace Parcells, and that sort of began a revolving door of coaches that never lived up to that Parcells legacy. One that until Coughlin came along and won those 2 Super Bowls, a legacy that loomed over every coach that was the head coach of the Giants.
Yeah, it was rough, and they were only 7 years away from the start of the Jim Fossil era at that point. Your boy, who led them through the end of the 90s and early 2000s. And had a couple of good years mixed in. But, yeah, so the Giants, I mean, with where they were in the 80s to where they ended up shortly after this is pretty amazing for sure. So that was pretty interesting. The players in this game, let's go through a couple of the players and kind of what happened with them. So Hostetler first. Hostetler was really a surprise in this game to me. Played really well, I mean, for the most part. But he continued to battle Sims a couple of years. Ended up breaking his back at one point a couple years later. Ended up on the Raiders for a few years. Had a pretty good little run with the Raiders. Won a playoff game. Actually, the last playoff win in L.A. until the Rams won in 2017. So almost, 20 plus years, actually, between wins in L.A. and the playoffs. He had a decent career for the most part.
Yeah, Hostetler, you have to remember, and this is something I found one of the most interesting parts of this run the Giants went on. He was a backup for 4 full seasons before this 1990 season. When has that happened this day and age, where a guy's a backup for 4 straight years, stays on the same team, gets his shot, produces when he gets the chance, and then, like you said, he goes to the Raiders, has some success there, but he'll forever be known for coming in during the Super Bowl run and winning one for the Giants.
This fun fact on Hostetler, he ended up being an uncle to 2 NFL players. Do you know where those 2 guys played?
I have no idea.
One played for the Bills and one played for the Giants. How crazy is that?
Wow.
His 2 nephews. I can't remember the last name. It's like Stupar or something like that. Anyway, fun fact for the show. Ottis Anderson, big game, huge game MVP. This was kind of the tail end of his career, obviously. He had some really good years early on, had some nice years during his career. But after this game, he only started 1 more game in his career.
34 years old he was during this game. He was an iffy guy to make the Giants roster in preseason during the season. He's another guy who got traded to the Giants, sat for almost 2 full seasons not playing much. And then, like I said, during this season, he would share time with Rodney Hampton, who was a rookie, who would go on to be the Giants' main running back for most of the 90s. And this was obviously, his last shining moment as a professional, and he made the most of it. I mean, he's exactly the kind of running back that the Giants needed to carry out this ground and pound strategy, along with the change of pace in Dave Meggett.
Yeah, Lawrence Taylor for the Giants, who, in my mind, really was kind of non-existent in this game. We didn't really mention that during the talk, but he really didn't have any impact in this game. Did I miss something there?
No, you didn't miss anything. He didn't have much of an impact. I think it was as a result of number one, the Giants defense not really being on the field much.
True.
And number two, they made some mention of it during the game where he was getting double and triple team the whole game.
Yeah.
So I think if you combine those two things, I mean, LT from a overall perspective with the players in this game, I mean, he's one of the top 5 players, probably arguably in NFL history. Him and obviously Bruce Smith, probably the best individual players in this game.
A lot of what we talk about now is legacy, is what's happened since the NFL.
Want to hear something wild?
Yeah.
One of my neighbors that I was talking about before that was celebrating the Giants win. His initials were LT.
Okay.
And back in the day, LT had an earring,
right,
with the initials LT. And of course, my neighbor had one also.
Love it. Now that's about as jersey as it gets right there. That sounds
with the Zubaz pants on.
Oh yeah,
with the Lawrence Taylor
hat.
jersey on, with the LT earring. You can't. If I put that character in a movie, you'd think it was too over the top.
Yeah, for sure. Who else? Scott Norwood. He'd go on to play one more season with the Bills before retiring. This was basically the end of his career. And it kind of sucks to go out on this kind of a note. He didn't have a long career. He started with the Birmingham Stallions, fun fact, before he moved on to the NFL, but not much of a player after this. His legacy is remembering that one kick.
And some other, what stuck out to me about the Giants players from this era was the fact that a lot of them were contributors and good players, but they've turned into sort of cult heroes in the New York, New Jersey area. You still see a lot of these guys popping up on Giants broadcasts, as Giants analysts on studio shows, as the occasional radio guest. You see Carl Banks is a fixture on the Giants radio broadcast. You have Howard Cross for years was on the Yes Network on a Giants football show. Howard Cross in this game was the fellow tight end along with Mark Bavaro. There's just a lot of these guys. Phil Simms, obviously, I think we all know who Phil Simms is. He's took on more of a national role, but a lot of these guys just you still see them around. You see once the Super Bowls come around, you'll hear an interview with Phil McConkey, Steve Tasker, all these guys.
It's very New York too that like a guy like those guys will be around. I feel like that's kind of like how the Yankees and the Mets, they still have these guys that are around and will pop up, and maybe because it's such a large media market where there's so much content being produced every day that they need these guys around, and the fan base is so passionate. But yeah, it is interesting to see these guys are kind of the face of the Giants franchise, especially for our generation for sure.
And another thing with New York sports is not the teams besides for the Yankees. None of the teams have really had sustained success.
Yeah, true.
So when you want to harken back to the good old days, I mean, you're wheeling out, the Knicks from the late 60s and early 70s. You're wheeling out the Mets from the mid 80s. So that's another reason why I think these guys stay in front of mind a lot is, until the Giants went on that run with Eli here in the mid-late 2000s, this Giants team was the last sort of thing to latch onto for a lot of Giants fans.
All right, let's talk what if in this game, some what if scenarios. I got one I'll start with, and it goes back to that drive in the fourth quarter. What if the Giants would have been able to score a touchdown there to go up 23-17 rather than 19-17 when the Bills rose up and held them to a field goal? A, there would have been more time on the clock. And then B, you wouldn't have had the Bills going down playing conservatively, as you mentioned, playing for a field goal, when they honestly, with that offense and that team, they should have been playing for a touchdown to begin with. So I think things might have been different had the Bills actually not performed as well as they did on defensively there. It's crazy.
That's a huge what if for me. But also, what if on that Mark Ingram play that we talked about before, that run after catch, I had completely forgotten about that. That might have been one of the top 2 or 3 plays of the game. And if he doesn't convert that, is that drive even as memorable as it is now to Giants fans and football fans in general?
No, definitely not. That was arguably that could have been the play of the game. I mean, when you really go down and look at everything that happened in that game, and try to drill it down to one single play outside of that field goal attempt at the end, that was the play. It changes that entire drive, because that drive still went 3 or 4 more minutes. It still went like 6 plays or so beyond that, and it would have resulted, best case scenario, in a field goal rather than a touchdown. It would not even been guaranteed at that point. So that's a good one. The other what if, and it's not really specific to this game, but what if the 49ers would have beaten the Giants in the NFC Championship game? Do you think the Bills have a better chance against that Niners team, or do you think the Niners go on to win it?
I think, remembering from what I remembered about those Niners teams. So first of all, you would have had the Niners going for 3 straight Super Bowl wins in this, if they did make it to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And one thing about those 49ers teams, as you know, Ben knows this, no one listening does, but I'm a little bit of an NFL and football geek. So what you learn looking back at those 49ers teams is that their defense was a little bit better than I think people thought. So I think if you combine that, a defense that maybe was not as good as the Giants, but not that far off, and if you combine that with a high-powered offense, I think, who knows who would have won. But I think certainly from a Vegas point spread standpoint, it would have been a lot closer to a pick 'em or a -1 or 2 here or there than it was in this game.
Do you have any more what-if scenarios?
And the only other one I have is what if the Bills just won, in general, just won the game?
True.
How would their players be viewed differently? And most notably, Kelly, because the quarterback's always judged on Super Bowl wins or losses more than anyone else, Jim Kelly, and also Thurman Thomas, because he would have came out as the star from this game if the Bills had ever won.
And Marv Levy. I think he'd get a lot more credit as a head coach than what he gets, too. I don't know how many people in this generation, the millennials, actually know about Marv Levy unless you're a Bills fan. He's kind of a forgotten coach a little bit every year that goes on. So, yeah, that's a good one, too. And I wonder how it would have changed the course of history the next few years had they won that game, too. Probably not much because those teams that beat them were just that good. But who knows with the confidence having won that first one. Going social, what would have been different about this game if it was played in the social media era? I'll start the kick. The kick would have gotten all the play. I mean, the kick, the bum, the Norwood, there would have been a gif of the guy with the camcorder on the field. The player had one of those old school 80s handheld camcorders recording the game. I don't know where the hell he got that and how he had it on the field that quickly or if he even saw it, but the kick would have been, I think, front center on social media. What do you got?
From a social media standpoint, I think this referee would have been a cult figure. I don't know if you noticed. Number one, guy's name was Jerry Seaman, first of all.
Yep.
Number two, he had a hat on with a roof bend on it, on the brim. And number three, he had the creepiest...
You got to explain the roof bend for people that don't know what you're talking about.
The roof bend is the brim of his hat looked like the roof of a Cape Cod style house.
Folded
look at a Cape Cod style house from the side, and then look at Jerry Seaman's hat brim, and you'll know what I mean. And then lastly about Jerry was he had the creepiest smirk and smile when he announced penalties. I don't know what it was. I looked at him. I'm like, this guy, he seems really happy he's announcing a penalty right now. So I think he would have been an absolute hit on social media.
It was his last game, right? I think as a referee. I think they mentioned that. So maybe he was just giddy. It wasn't. He was about to be like the head of the refs or something. I think I'm still getting over the roof bend. I think another big deal on social media would have been halftime. Halftime was New Kids on the Block. Okay, I didn't.
Wow.
Did you get to see this performance? I didn't see it on the link that I watched. But I would imagine, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think something I read said during halftime they did not even show New Kids on the Block because they went back to an ABC News special report on the Gulf War stuff that was going on. So that would have blown up on social media if you would have taken off New Kids on the Block and not shown that halftime show and put news on instead. That would have taken over.
Absolutely. Well, that's funny. I didn't realize. This breaking news to me that they were the halftime show. Wow.
Yeah.
And also, what about the kickers' face masks in general?
Yeah, the one
Matt Barr's face mask, Norwood's face mask, the punter's face masks. These guys were more. I don't know if you noticed, but the first Bills punt after the Giants kickoff, their punter made a tackle too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those guys got after
it. With the single bar face mask.
Yeah. It was a different era for sure back then for the kickers. So let's go to What If I Told You, unless you have something else social.
That's it. That's all I got for the social.
So let's go a couple What If I Told Yous. What if I told you, Mike, that Bill Parcells would only win 3 more playoff games the rest of his career after the run he had just come off of?
I would tell you that for sure. I did not even realize that, but adding them up in my head, you are 100% right. But what if I told you that Ottis Anderson, would not really ever have another relevant moment in the Super Bowl, and this would be sort of what he's remembered as a football player, and he had a great career.
It was basically the opposite of he would be like the antithesis of Scott Norwood. He went out on that high note, never to really be talked about again, whereas Scott Norwood ended on that kick, and that was basically it for his career. They basically went two completely different directions. What if I told you the Giants, they weren't the team of the 80s probably, but they were right there with the 49ers. What if I would have told you, though, that the Giants would only make 2 playoff appearances over the next decade?
Oof. Yeah, they made two playoff appearances, and the next time they got to the Super Bowl was with Fossil, right?
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
A Giants team, which before then, they didn't have much success either.
No, exactly.
So you look at the Giants' success really came in this run, and then with the Coughlin-Eli Giants in the mid-late 2000s.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's wrap it up, Mike. Just some overall takeaways from this game, just kind of big picture. Going back and watching this game again, how did it hold up for you?
It was actually probably better than I thought it was going to be. The game as a whole. I mean, we all knew that. I knew the kick was coming the whole time. But the game as a whole and how crisp it was played. The teams were very sound. There was hardly any penalties. I don't think there was any turnovers, right? There was no turnovers.
Yeah, I don't think so.
There was no turnovers in the game. The Giants only had 14 turnovers the entire regular season.
That was crazy.
So that's what held up to me was the fact that 2 totally different styles and how well played this game was.
Yeah, I agree. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I didn't really know much about this game going into it outside of it being a big game in the Super Bowl, the kick. But to me, I've got a lot more appreciation for this matchup in terms of what these two teams were, how good they were for this year. I mean, this was pretty much an ideal Super Bowl for that season. You rarely get that matchup that you're really clamoring for. And sure, if the 49ers would have been in it, it might have been a little bit bigger deal. But the two contrasting styles of play, the coaches you had involved in this game, the way it finished, I mean, I don't have the sense of history of all the Super Bowls, but this game has to rate up there pretty highly because you're right. It was played at such a high level. There was so much talent in this game. Overall, just an appreciation for that Super Bowl 25 and what those two teams were all about.
I couldn't have put it any better myself, Ben. Perfectly put.
So let's wrap it up on that note. Remember, you can subscribe, and please do subscribe. Give us a review, too, if you want, on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting app that you use to listen to this and all your content. You can email us at distantpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Distant Podcast. Join the conversation there. Tweet us any games you want to talk about, hear us talk about, any games you'd recommend we go back and watch, because you might have a sense of, your Virginia Cavalier football team back in 1983 played in a classic matchup that we have never heard of. Tell us about it. We'll go back and watch it. And then also check out the website, distantreplaypodcast.com. That's going to put a bow on this one, Mike. I had fun on this game, and as we both mentioned, I think this was a better experience than I think we thought it would be going in.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to the next one. And this game is going to be hard to top.
Yeah, for sure it will. So subscribe, please. Apple Podcasts. Check us out online as well. Thank you for listening to Distant Replay. Join us again for another episode where we go back and relive one game as it aired originally every single episode. Thanks for listening.